that you're going to be hearing many different speakers today, coming from different directions, different styles, different approaches. I'm very close to our dear Rosh Yeshiva. I have a zchut to be very close. We're extremely different in many different ways, and yet I for sure respect them a lot. We think differently, we present things differently, and so on and so forth. Every person thinks differently, and all the different speakers are going to be speaking today are going to be speaking in their own style and content. And my recommendation is as such. Number one, and every year I say this, I never say this in any shir that I ever give. If people sleep, people sleep. If people are awake, people are awake. Obviously, for like anybody who speaks that people are awake. But when it comes to Emunah Day, not specifically only when I speak, for the entire day, try hard. I recommend, don't sleep today. And if you find yourself drifting off, stand. Go to the back and stand, whether it's here, whether it's in Matan. Chaval. There's too much good information today. You'll be sorry in the future that you didn't take advantage of this day. I recommend not to doze off today. Try. That's number one. Number two, the idea a wise person needs to piece together as a puzzle all the different pieces that you hear today and to try to integrate them to one understanding. Okay? Take pieces from different people. Your job is to try to unify them together. What I would like to do in the next hour or so is present a few yesodot, foundations of what la'aniyut da'ati, yesodot emunah, fundamental concepts or klalim in terms of emunah that I think are very important, actually crucial, to recognize and understand before one enters into this significant day, and that is the day of Emunah. And foundation number one, I'll number it as we go along. Foundation number one is exactly the point we just started off with. Let's begin. As I said, one can talk about Emunah and go on and on and on. In fact, for days I've been trying to work out for myself not what to speak about, but what not to speak about. That's the big challenge, and for me at least, to piece together a shir like this. There's so much one can say, and there's so much that you're going to be hearing today. And then, let's just say, like the famous Gemara in Masechet Shabbat, we all know the story about the convert who came to Shammai and then to Hillel, asking, please teach us the entire Torah as I'm standing on one foot, whatever the depth of that may mean of standing on one foot. I'm sure the Maharal has something to say on that. But in any case, along that type of thinking, at the end of the day, after all that's said and done, tell me one sentence that contains in it the Emunah of Jews. One sentence that encompasses it all. I think most average Jews today and over history who would be asked to give a one sentence, just like Hillel said, "Ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha," zeh kol haTorah kula, or "Ma'idasani lach lechavach lo ta'avid," the other side of the coin. Whatever you hate, don't do to your friend. That's the old Torah. The rest, go learn. That's the details. On that type of thinking, I'll say the same thing. What's the one sentence of Emunah for a Jew? That it's all, the rest is details? I think it's source number one. Look inside the source number one. I think most Jews throughout the ages would respond with a sentence. Parshat Vayitchanan, Sefer Dvarim, source number one. Please look inside. Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. That's it. One sentence. Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. What's the meaning of this sentence, especially in a generation like ours, where nobody in the world anymore, at least not in the Western world, the modern world that we're somewhat part of, want to be part of, should we be part of, without going into that discussion right now, but the world that we live in, the modern world, nobody entertains the idea of multiple gods, right? It's either you believe in one God, or you don't believe in any God. And as such, what do we mean when we say Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad today? The depth of it is as following. Listen carefully, please. That though the world comes across to us incredibly diverse, with plenty, multiple pieces, details, species, cultures, galaxies, stars, stages in history. Even though the world seems so fragmented and made up of so many pieces, I'm able to see through all that diversity and multiplicity, and I'm able to make a statement in the declaration. There's one unification that stands outside and beyond all of it. That's the depth of the meaning of Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. I'm not fazed by the fact that the world is made up of so many pieces. I'm not confused by the fact that the world is made up of so many different faces, approaches, worldviews, cultures, whatever it might be. I'm able to see beyond it all and understand and declare daily, twice at least, that there is one who is outside and beyond all of this multiplicity and who's responsible and who's the source for it all. That's the depth and the meaning of Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. And in fact, the more you reflect upon it, the more you'll realize how true that is. One of the biggest, if not the biggest challenge to Emunah b'Hashem, especially in a generation like ours, people from Chumash have heard this many times already, is the fact that we live in a generation where plenty, multiplicity, possibilities of anything is so much one of the idols, one of the avodah zaras of our generation. The more you have of anything, the better. The more possibilities, the better. We measure the quality of things by how much. That's in a generation like that, the challenge to see the oneness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the world is greater, maybe than any other generation in the past. The first to discover this concept, the first to discover Hashem is one, the first to discover that outside of the entire world there is the source of it all, who's not limited by the world that He created. This is the fundamental point. The first one is Avraham Avinu, who according to Chazal defines Emunah. He is, if you wish, Ish HaEmunah. He's Mr. Emunah. Chazal said explicitly, על הפסוק בשיר השירים תשורי מראש אמנה, את הפסוק ראש אמנה אומר המדרש, זהו אברהם אבינו שהוא היה ראש למאמינים. Abraham Avinu was the first, the head or the origin of all מאמינים in the world. He's the first to discover that the entire world comes from a source which is outside of the world. And that's why he was able to, over years, reach the conclusion how ridiculous the claims of his generation are, and also later generations, that the forces are of the world, which pull the strings of the world, are contained within the world itself. He was able to understand this point and realize, Chazal attributed when he's going into the Akedah, and he sees the place of the Akedah from far, Vayaret HaMakom Merachok. Vayaret HaMakom Merachok, pshat-wise, what does it mean? The Makom, which we're very close to, and that is the Har HaBayit, Beit HaMikdash. The deeper meaning of that, the Medrash says, as we all know, HaMakom is also another name for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Lo aleinu if you have to pay a shiva call, if you happen to be Ashkenazi. So you say, HaMakom Yenachem Etchem B'tov Shara B'lei Tzion B'Yerushalayim. Or Haggadah Shel Pesach, we say 4 times, Baruch HaMakom, Baruch Hu. We refer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu as HaMakom. Says the Medrash, what is the meaning of HaMakom? What kind of a name of God is the space? Says the Medrash, a very profound point, exactly the point that we're talking about. He's referred to as HaMakom, Shehu Mekomo Shel Olam. Ve'ein ha'olam me'mekomo. Hashem is the makom of the world. The world is not the makom of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's not that there are many things in the world, as a child thinks, and one more thing, big thing, is God. God is not in the world as much as the world is in Him. That's a transformation of perspective. That's a shift in how to step outside of immature, childish thinking and the advancing over to mature thought. And that is, all of space, all of time is contained within Him. It's subtle thought, it's deep concept. The Medrash says it explicitly. That's the meaning that Avraham Avinu discovered, HaMakom Merachok. Once he discovered that, Hashem opens Himself up to him and says, Lech Lecha Avraham Avinu. And from that Lech Lecha begins the Jewish journey of our Emunah, with all of the challenges, Ad Etzem Hayom Hazeh, till this very day that we're sitting here today. And it will continue as a challenge until Hashem chooses to reveal Himself completely, and that is in Yemot HaMashiach. Let's examine the personality of this Ish Emunah, Avraham Avinu. And for that, look inside the source number 2. Source number 2 says an interesting point, and that is Sefer Yeshayahu. It says, Shim'u elai rodfei tzedek. Those of you who are chasing after justice, those of you who are looking for what is the justice of the world, what's the truth behind the world. Mevakshei Hashem, those of you who are honestly looking for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Habitu, I'll tell you what to do. You need to trace your search back. El tzur chutzavtim. Tzur, mazet tzur? A rock, a stone. To the stone or the original rock which you were carved from. Ve'el makevet bo nukartem. Similar concept. Habitu, what does that mean? What's the original tzur, the rock that we were carved or engraved from? El Avraham avichem ve'el sarat echonelchem. Hashem continues and testifies about Avraham Avinu. Listen to this. Ki echad ka'ativ va'avarcheu ve'arbeu. Hashem labels and testifies that Avraham Avinu is echad. He who discovers that Hashem is echad receives from Hashem the title Avraham Avinu, you are echad. And this takes us on to Yesod number 2, the second foundation of Emunah for today. What does it mean that he who is referred to as echad discovers the echad of the world? A lot to think about. I'm leaving that for thinkers in the room, and Baruch Hashem, we have enough thinkers in our yeshiva to develop this, and one can branch off in many different directions. But on the level that we're talking about, I think the most basic level is it's just another way to relate to the way Avraham Avinu is referred to in the Torah and by Chazal, Avraham Ha'ivri. Maze Ha'ivri? That he was be'ever echad shel nahar and everybody else on the other side of the river, which means a person who did not and was not willing to one bit conform to the way that his generation was thinking, and insisting that his conclusions about the nature of reality will be his own, that he acquired with his bare 10 fingers. Nobody else is going to dictate to him how to think, not his father. We know that from the Midrashim. Nobody, not his Rabbanim, Klum. He on his own, with his bare 10 fingers, figured out Hashem Echad. The more you think about it, the more you would admire Avraham Avinu. The more it's astonishing how a human being on his own can break through on his own beyond all the notions of his generation and reach for the first time the conclusion the source of the world again must be beyond and outside and higher than the world itself. That's the second yesod for us, and that is the Baal Shem Tov says it in his own words. Some people may not like to hear it, and that is, we start every Shmona Esrei with Birkat Avot. Baruch Atah Hashem, Elokeinu ve'Elokei Avoteinu. Elokei Avraham, Elokei Yitzchak, ve'Elokei Yaakov. Says the Baal Shem Tov, Elokeinu, and only afterwards ve'Elokei Avoteinu. Yes, of course, as the Pasuk in Yeshayahu says, you need to trace the Emunah back to the origins. But first of all, it needs to be a discovery of your own. And if you don't discover Hashem with your own bare 10 fingers, if you're not actively involved, and if you don't acquire your emunah with your own brain, and with your own heart, and within your own way of thinking, you're not going to really have a real and personal relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that's the second yesod, and that's what Avraham Avinu teaches us. He is echad. He was able to live his life as an echad. I don't live as part of a society. I live as an individual, and as such I discovered HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Which means that's the prerequisite to discover HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Which means anybody whose emunah is based on leaning, as I often hear, I very often hear, I sit with a guy, it's not the person's fault, but that's the way he was educated. I believe, I guess I believe, that's what I grew up that way. That's what the teachers always said in school. My parents believe in God, so I believe in God. Every person in his own style, but it usually comes with some kind of a stutter as I was mimicking. Yes, I guess so. Emunah of Avraham Avinu is not based on any I guess so. There is a institution which again very much are considered professionals in giving over the foundations of Emunah. I don't know if still today, but I remember years ago from a very close friend of mine who's not alive anymore, used to teach in this yeshiva, Rav Podolsky, who also used to teach for them, and used to give me over this main concept that they would give over is you need to be able to reach a conclusion that God exists beyond reasonable doubt. Can you imagine standing under the chuppah and telling your wife that you just married, I love you beyond reasonable doubt? What kind of a relationship is based on beyond reasonable doubt? I completely 100% disagree with that approach. As I see it, that is not Emunah. For sure not of Avraham Avinu. Let's move on. Next yesod, number 3. Let's continue source number 1. We didn't read all of it, we only read the opening sentence. Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad ואהבת את השם אלוקיך בכל לבבך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודיך והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבביך ושיננתם לבניך ודיברת בם בשבתך בביתך ובלכתך בדרך ובשוכבך ובקומך וקשרתם לאות על ידיך והיו לטוטפות בעיניך וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשעריך. We all know this, Baruch Hashem, thanks to Rav Hirschman's idea. I think in recent couple of years in yeshiva, we actually, when we daven here in yeshiva, we say it all together. I think that's actually very intense and very nice. In any case, what did we just read? That if indeed Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, which is this sentence of Emunah of a Jew, tell me your Emunah. What's your sentence of Emunah? Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. Then it does not end as a awareness, as a recognition. It immediately continues to an obligating, committed life. There are obligations that trickle down from or directly stem from this recognition. It's not an awareness, it's not a recognition that stands on its own. In a sense, it's close to meaningless if it's not applied in the next pasuk that follows. Now we're touching upon here, I often mention this point, one of the biggest, and I think unresolved machlokot that we Jews, Torah Jews, have with a secular Western world of today. What do I mean? I mean as such, what stems from what we're saying right now is, for a Jew, I exist, that means that I'm obligated. Ani kayam, ani bar chiyuv. We'll elaborate on it more later. For a secular Western average person, would cringe when he would hear these words. I mean, that's the ideology in the street. Would cringe from this. Why? What do you mean bar chiyuv? I'm not obligated to anything. It's true, there's some basics in terms of society so that we can get along. Most moral people would agree. But I don't have any obligations towards anybody. The famous words that open up Sefer Mesilat Yesharim. The first stage before anything else, before going up any stage or ladder up to higher stages of relationship with the Kadosh Baruch Hu. First of all, first of all, for a person to figure out what is his obligation in the world. That's first stage. Everything else stems from that. That sentence for a secular Western person, he would cringe with that sentence. The Shem says, what do you mean? What do you mean? This is the foundation of it all. What does it mean? Torah shebechtav, why is it all in front of us? There's an expectation to be committed, practically speaking, with one's whole being. I mean, pshat, not medrash. B'chol levavcha, b'chol nafshecha. With your whole being, to be committed to the implications and to the meaning of the first sentence, which means that if Hashem indeed is Echad, and the entire world belongs to Him, and all lives and all life in general belongs to that one source, then there are implications to that, and I expect you to be committed to those implications. When you develop that in Torah Sheba'al Peh, Chazal, it becomes pretty intense, because V'avdat Hashem Elokecha b'chol levavcha means something, B'shnei yetzarecha. U'b'chol nafshecha, what does b'chol nafshecha mean? I expect you that if it comes to that, to give over your life to me, the source of life, if it comes to it. Jews have done that for thousands of years. 70 years ago, many Jews said Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, and walked into a gas chamber. Many Jews for hundreds and hundreds of years, in many different situations, and there are many such testimonies of different stages in history, different pogroms, back in the Spanish Inquisition, back in the days of the Crusaders, Hashem Yimkom Damam, of all Bnei Yisrael that died in those horrible situations. Jews consistently chose one sentence, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, and with that went into the fire. Anybody heard the name Ro'i Klein? Officer Ro'i Klein? Ro'i Klein is an officer, from guy, learned in yeshiva, served as an officer in the army. I think it was in the Second Lebanon War. He was with his chayalim, a grenade was thrown in their direction, 2 seconds for it to blow up. Said Shema, jumped on the grenade, saved the soldiers, gave over his life over to the source of his life, the HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I think everybody in this room is old enough, mature enough to address this issue. What would he do in such a situation? The situations are different. Halachically, a person has a chiyuv that if he is expected to bow down to the cross or to bow down to anything outside of Jewish belief, he's supposed to give up his life. So much so that our sources, it's brought down in halakha, you're supposed to imagine that when you say b'chol nafshecha. If it were to come to it, would I do it? We're not 14, 15 years old, we're 18, 19. Yes, we're addressing issues of life and death. Many people at the ages of 18, 19 addressed issues of life and death this past summer in Gaza, in Tzukei Dan. 18, 19 is a stage of life, even in our generation, a person needs to start addressing life-death issues. Would I? We think that it belongs to, it's not reality anymore. Whoever forces in the world somebody to bow down to their belief. I also would think so, but in the last year or so, who knows where this world is moving towards. There are people who are walking around the world, not far from here at all, not far at all, who are walking around killing people because of their belief. Would you have believed that 5 years ago? I wouldn't. Where's it moving towards? Only he knows. If I were to be in such a situation, would I or would I not? So known testimonies back in, I think it was Gzerot Tachtat, one of the terrible stages of pogroms, where thousands and thousands of Jews said Shema and went into the fire. And the only ones who did not, this supports Rabina's point from before, were the Jewish philosophers. They did not. The issue with Ro'i Klein is something else completely. Halachically, it's totally different. But outside of the halachic discussion, could you see yourself doing that? The issue today, I think mainly in our generation, is that for many of us, the recognition, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, is blurry. It's vague. And because the recognition is vague and blurry, so therefore the implications are blurry and vague. And therefore all that stems from that, and that is that Hashem Elokecha b'chol levavcha b'chol nafshecha, all that it spills over onto is blurry. And the following question, a person needs a lot of self-honesty, with a very clean heart to answer for himself. The following question: to what extent do I may not be even conscious of it, and maybe yes, maybe not. Maybe I prefer to leave things blurry so that I can remain less committed. It's a question. If you consider yourself a person, I'm speaking also to myself. Yeah, I'm not talking down to anybody, believe me. If you consider Amos Luban yourself as a person who's honest, who tries somewhat to walk in the pathways of our Rosh Yeshiva with a midat ha'emet, I admire him for that. Sometimes he pays a price for it. Midat ha'emet, the whole way through. If you consider yourself a person of truth, you need to ask yourself this question alone, without anybody around, totally alone. Do I prefer to leave things somewhat blurry, so that my commitment is also more blurry? You don't have to answer anybody. Nobody. Only two in the world would know the answer to that. You and God, if indeed He exists. That's the discussion of today. To conclude this stage, before we move on to other stages, the machloket, which I think, and I say this, unresolved machloket between Western world and us. Am I a bar chiyuv? Does my existence imply obligation towards He who gave me my existence? Or do not owe my existence to anybody? What that is a manifestation of is the following simple question. It's basically a rephrasing of the same issue. Who is the Baal Bayit? Right? Everybody knows what a Baal Bayit is. Who is the Baal Bayit over my life? Am I the Baal Bayit of my life? Or is He, capital H, the Baal Bayit over my life? I think every year I make this point. I claim that the Western world lives in a complete contradiction. Because on the one hand, most people there would say, I am my own Baal Bayit of my life. But the moment that same very person is going to want to, take his life, chas v'shalom, they'll immediately stop him, call the psychiatrist, call the police, and he's screaming, for God's sake, whatever he may say, let me take my life. It's my life. No, it's not your life. What do you mean? But that's what you claim. It's either yes, your life, or it's not your life. And if our life belongs to us, let us take it. No, if he wants to do such a thing, clearly, mentally something is wrong. Who are you to say that? I own my life. I don't want to live anymore. No. What does that show us? That everybody in the world, at least in the Western world, agrees with the Mishnah and Pirkei Avot. כי על כוחך אתה נוצר, ועל כוחך אתה נולד, ועל כוחך אתה חי, ועל כוחך אתה מת, ועל כוחך אתה עתיד ליתן דין וחשבון לפני מלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא. Nobody in this room was asked whether he wanted to be conceived, correct me if I'm wrong. Nobody in this world, correct me if I'm wrong, was asked whether you want to be born. Torah will claim, nobody asks you also whether you want to live. Because you don't own your life. And the Western world joins along and says that's true, as we just said. The policemen and the psychiatrists who are rushing in are running proof to that. And nobody ever is asked whether they want to die. In fact, the Gemara says that nobody gets a right to know when they will die. David Melech wanted to know when. No, sorry. No, you can't know when you're going to die. And Shilton b'yom hamavet, it says in Kohelet. People, the day of death is the day of loss of control. Let's move on. Yesod number 4. To claim that I very often hear, especially in the last year or two, one-on-one conversations, it often comes up. All you're saying is very nice. All the concepts of Avraham Avinu are beautiful. But who said that what he's saying is the truth? And what makes me obligated to believe in what Avraham Avinu believes in? In fact, there are many Christians out there in the world who are as convinced as you, Amos Luban, are in your Avraham Avinu belief, just like you're convinced. The Christian guy is also convinced. And the Muslim guy is also convinced. We know how deeply convinced that they are. They give up their lives because they believe something is waiting for them in another world. We're not going to mention what. They're just as convinced. So what makes our belief more valid? Has anybody here ever visited what I think is the saddest place in the world, a psychiatric ward? I spent many hours of my life in psychiatric wards. Thank God, not for myself. Intense place. I think it's the saddest place in the world. I've been in oncology departments. My experience, psychiatric wards are the saddest place in the world. I've been in more than one. And yet, as in such places, also funny things happen. I can tell you the following story about my mother-in-law from Washington, who, tzaddiket, she would go and visit all kinds of sick Jews in Washington in different hospitals, and she once went to a psychiatric closed ward, to visit a patient. So the doctor brings her into the room, and she sits with the patient for an hour, and the doctor said, "I'll be back in an hour." An hour goes by, and the doctor doesn't come back. 2 hours go by. 3 hours go by, the doctor doesn't go back. My mother-in-law goes to the little window on the door, and she starts knocking. A guard walks by, and she says, "I'm not from here, let me out." He starts laughing. That's what everybody here says. She got stuck there for 10 hours. 10 hours later, the doctor comes rushing, apologizes, "I'm sorry, I totally forgot." Just one little, story. Sad place, funny things happen there also. I'll tell you a story about a tzaddik in a psychiatric ward. Something to learn from. Ben Adam lechavero. A very big, chashuv rav, gigantic Talmid Chacham. Chaval, I didn't get to know him in his life. Had I known it when he was alive, I would have run after him to Bnei to learn his ways. Rav Ganichowski, I think Rav Abraham Ganichowski. What?
Janet's great uncle.
Right. Gigantic Talmid Chacham and a giant in mitzvot sheben adam lechavero. They don't necessarily have to go hand in hand. They're definitely expected to go hand in hand. By him, they went hand in hand. One example. He once went to visit somebody in a psychiatric ward, and all of a sudden he saw somebody from his shul that's there. He was so afraid that that person will be embarrassed, so that Rav Ganichowski ran over to him and said, please don't tell anybody you saw me here. Meaning he disguised as if he himself was a patient, asking the patient not to tell anybody so that he is not embarrassed. And we'll get back to the story a little later on, towards the end of our words today. Anyway, why am I mentioning psychiatric wards? One of the more known phenomena in psychiatric wards, I've heard it myself with my ears, often one or two people will come over to you, a new person is in the crowd, a new person is in the ward, and they'll come tell you how they are actually the Messiah, or that actually God spoke to them. And I ask, what in the world is the difference between them and Yoshka, Inyane Dioma, and Muhammad? Ma'afdal. In fact, I find it absolutely unbelievable that for thousands of years, millions of people believe is based on the same thing that these people in psychiatric wards came to tell me. Now you may say, and what's the difference between that and you? You kept talking about Avraham Avinu. Hashem spoke to him and said, Lech Lecha. And from there the journey began. You are 100% right. Hashem speaking to Avram and saying Lech Lecha doesn't cause Amos Luban to be obligated to nothing. Nothing. Nothing to him. You're right. Absolutely not. All the discoveries of Avraham Avinu lo mechayev oti one bit. אז מה כן מחייב אותך? מה שמחייב אותי, source number 4. Look inside this. ויהי ביום השלישי, ספר שמות, פרשת יתרו. ויהי ביום השלישי ביות הבוקר, ויהי קולות וברקים, וענן כבד על ההר, וכל שופר חזק מאוד, ויחרד כל העם אשר במחנה. A big thank you to my wife, Adina. Should be a zchut for her, she prepared the source sheet for me. ויוצא משה את העם לקראת האלוהים מן המחנה, והתייצבו בתחתית ההר. והר סיני ישן כולו, מפני אשר ירד עליו השם באש, ויעל עשנו כאש אל הכבשן. ויחרד כל ההר מאוד, Please keep following inside with me. ויהי קול השופר הולך וחזק מאוד. משה ידבר והאלוקים יעננו בקול. וירד השם על הר סיני אל ראש ההר. ויקרא השם למשה אל ראש ההר ויעל משה. ויאמר השם אל משה, etc., etc. Skip please just a few lines to the next underlined part. וידבר אלוקים את כל הדברים האלה לאמור. And this is what makes Amos Luban, I think every Jew, מחויב לאמונה and to all of its implications. Not Hashem speaking to Abraham, not even Hashem speaking to Moshe at the snare or any other time. This, and from this day, and only from this day and on. And what did Hashem say? וידבר אלוקים את כל הדברים האלה לאמור, to the ears of 600,000 Jews, all at once, in a mass revelation. אנוכי השם אלוקיך, אשר הוצאתיך מארץ מצרים, מבית עבדים. The first of the 10 commandments. What's special about the first commandment? What's the difference between the way the first commandment speaks as opposed to any other commandment, including the second one? That we'll get to in a moment. The next stage is more profound, more pashut than that grammatically. What? It's not a commandment. What does it say? It's a statement. So why is it called Aseret HaDibrot? Is that a mitzvah? Is it not a mitzvah? You're Jewish. Machloket. Yes, true. There's a machloket. According to the Rambam, source number 5, not just that it's a mitzvah, it's the mitzvah number 1 of all mitzvot. Everybody here knows there's such a book called Sefer HaChinuch, which means listing all the mitzvot in the Torah according to the order of the Parashiyot HaShavua. The Rambam, typical of the Rambam's super organized way of thinking, he organizes the mitzvot not according to the Parashiyot of the Torah, but rather conceptually. And as such, by the Rambam, mitzvah number 1 is very significant. Mitzvah number 1 is the following. Look inside source number 5. Mitzvah, as you can see it printed just below, Mitzvah Aseh Aleph in Sefer HaMitzvot of the Rambam. This is not Mishnah Torah. This is in Sefer HaMitzvot, separate book of the Rambam, often printed together. The command that we were commanded, Le'amin Be'elokut, to believe in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The content of it is to believe, to have faith in the fact sheyesh sham ilah v'siba, that there is a first cause and source. By the way, in Mishnah Torah he uses a different terminology, less Greek sounding. The first matzui rishon, first being. Here, for some reason, he uses that which sounds more influenced by Greek philosophy, talking about a cause and a source, as opposed to a first being. In any case, that there is a first cause and source, which is responsible for all that exists. And what's the source for that in the Torah? Says the Rambam. Anochi Hashem Elokecha Asher Hotzeiticha Me'eretz Mitzrayim Mibeit Abadim. There's another difference between this first commandment and the rest of the other commandments. Shimon said it a moment ago. Shimon, you said it. The difference between the first of the commandments and also the second and the rest. Anochi Hashem Elokecha Asher Hotzeiticha Me'eretz Mitzrayim Mibeit Abadim. I took you out of Mitzrayim. Lo yeh lecha Elohim acherim al panai. If you move on in the source, look inside please in source number 4. Second line of the commandments. Lo yeh lecha Elohim acherim al panai. Hashem is speaking in first person. The rest, Lo tisai Shem Hashem Elokecha. It's talking already in second person. Lo tisai Shem Hashem Elokecha lashav. Third person. Do not mention God's name. But Hashem is not saying, don't mention my name for no justified purpose. Don't mention God's name for no purpose. What's the meaning of that? The meaning of that is as such. The way in which יהודי מקיים את השני המצוות הראשונות, אנוכי השם אלוקיך, אשר הוצאתיך מארץ מצרים, מבית עבדים, ולא יהיה לך אלוהים אחרים על פניי, which is just the second side of the same coin, the positive and negative of the same one coin. Chazal, by the way, say, אנוכי השם אלוקיך is the source for all mitzvot aseh. And lo yeh lecha Elohim acharim al panai, says the Midrash, is the source for all mitzvot lo ta'aseh. All mitzvot aseh and lo ta'aseh stem from Anochi lo yeh lecha. The first two, which are two sides of one coin, of the Emunah b'Hashem, at least according to the Rambam and others, is said over in first person. Meaning, that is the way that you perform the mitzvah. When you are in front of Him. Other mitzvot are different. Other mitzvot are actions that you do which He commanded you. You do the act. You're not necessarily on the level, or you're not necessarily in that place of being in front of Him. The mitzvah of Emunah and its content means you are in front of Hashem. And as such, it's presented as such. I am Hashem, who took you out of Mitzrayim. You hear me speaking. The Gemara in Masachet Makot, the Rambam continues to quote that, by the way, in that source that we have in front of you. I'm not going to see it inside. If you want, you can see it as I'm speaking. The Gemara says it in Masachet Makot. Torah tziva lanu Moshe, Morashat Kihilat Yaakov. Torah, that's the number of the mitzvot, 613. Asks the Gemara, it's 611. So why is it you say that Torah are the Taryag? It's only 611? Says the Gemara. The first two, Anochi lo yeh lecha, were spoken by Hashem Himself. Anochi lo yeh lecha, shamanu mipiad gvura. We heard it from Hashem's mouth, not from Moshe. And from that, the Rambam shows that the Gemara itself refers to Anochi as a mitzvah. What's the depth of it? Please listen carefully. When a person is conceived, and he is in front of Hashem. When the moment the person dies, our sources tell us that explicitly. A person finds himself in front of Hashem. One of the most profound illusions that we suffer from is that when we live our life, we think that we're not in front of Hashem. A thinker understands that if the moment of my beginning, I was in front of Him. The moment of my end, I'm in front of Him. It doesn't take so much to conclude that every moment I'm in front of Him. In fact, that's what all our sources talk about, hashgacha, rethink, especially when it comes to Jews. There's differences of approach, the extent, how far, Jews, non-Jews. We don't fly anywhere when we die to stand in front of Hashem. All that happens is the body, which is the blinder, the master blinder, that we suffer from all our life, is removed. And I find myself in front of Hashem. I didn't go anywhere. I just discovered where I've been all along. The depth of it is, Anochi Hashem Elokecha asher hotzeiticha me'eretz Mitzrayim. That level of Hashem speaking in first person is at the basis and at the core of all mitzvot. And if Anochi Hashem Elokecha in my mind is glory, so then my relationship with all mitzvot is going to suffer from somewhat being glory. To the extent that Anochi Hashem Elokecha, or if you wish, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, I was able to develop a consciousness of full clarity about it. To that extent, that clarity is infusing all of the mitzvot. And my entire life of Torah and mitzvot is infused with this consciousness. Living in front of Hashem is not necessarily a madrega for people who totally went beyond. If it were to be so, then the Ramah, in the opening seif, in the Shulchan Aruch, you open up, every person has his own Mishnah Berurah. You probably learned it with a Rami, in one group or in another group, with a Chavrusa. Not in any Kabbalah book. It's brought down in the Shulchan Aruch. Let's see it all together inside. Most people here are well familiar with it. Source number 6. The Shulchan Aruch begins. This is the way a Jew begins his day. יתגבר כארי לעמוד בבוקר לעבודת בוראו. שיהיה הוא מעורר השחר. ועל כל פנים לא יאחר זמן התפילה שהציבור מתפלל. And now the Ramah inserts his Haggah, his comment, the first one of all, and after here, this is where he begins it. When a Jew opens up his eyes in the morning, Shiviti Hashem lenegdi tamid, the pasuk of David HaMelech in Sefer Tehillim. הוא כלל גדול בתורה ובמעלות הצדיקים אשר הולכים לפני אלוהים, and it continues with basically He says, this consciousness of Shiviti Hashem and Nagdi Tamid, I always put Hashem in front of me, or if you wish, I always put myself in front of Hashem. That is the core, fundamental consciousness of a Jew. And he goes on to quote the Rambam, but this time from the Moreh Nevuchim, that when a person lives in front of the king, or a person does not live in front of the king, the quality of his life is completely different. How much more so when we talk about Melech Malchei Malachim HaKadosh Baruch Hu? Where this stems from, the words of Shiviti Hashem Nagdi Tamid of David HaMelech, trickle down from, it's his own words, his own personal experience of Anochi Hashem Elokecha, Asher Hotzeiticha Me'eretz Mitzrayim Mibeit Avadim, which was said in first person. I'm present in front of Hashem. And this may sound, again, like levels of people or unbelievable tzaddikim, but that's not true. It's a chiyuv for a Jew to try, to aspire, to move himself, to create, with a lot of effort, bits and another bit and another bit of such an awareness throughout his life. It's a lifetime project. I'm much older than people in this room, most people. It's a lifetime project. And when you get somewhere and you think you're accomplished, like this, it can disappear. It's an awareness which is so hard to produce and so easy to lose. And it can switch from moment to moment. The question is, how much effort does a Jew want to put into it? To what extent does he want to live in a world of Anochi Hashem Elokecha, Asher Hotzeiticha Me'eretz Mitzrayim Mibeit Avadim? To what extent that Shema is not just something that he mumbles in the morning. Sorry for saying that, a little bit cynicism. Rather, to what extent Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, the sentence that Roy Klein said when he jumped on the grenade, that his great-grandparents may have said when they walked into a gas chamber, is for him the reality in which he lives, not a declaration that he's obligated to just say. He lives in the world which is defined for him in his mind because he acquired it. Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. I hope people understand what I'm trying to say. This is not an idea. It's not merely a concept. It's a question to what extent I live in a world. I've developed my awareness in a way that I live in a world of Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. I live in a world of Avraham Avinu. I'm not mechuyav from Avraham Avinu. I'm mechuyav from Matan Torah. But once Torah was given, it reflects back onto the entire Torah. Avraham Avinu did not write Lech Lecha. Moshe Rabbeinu wrote Lech Lecha. And because Moshe Rabbeinu wrote Lech Lecha, I'm committed to Lech Lecha and all that implies from the word Bereshit. As I'm committed to everything that the Torah writes, to whatever extent I accept the day of Matan Torah as a reality, not revealing Hashem, not talking to Moshe Rabbeinu, talking to all of Am Yisrael. That has to be further discussed. Not a simple topic. How do I address the fact? What's the difference between individual revelation and mass revelation to entire people? Do I accept it? How I deal with it? Fine, good. Ask questions. This is what this stands for. Nothing else than to get people to think. Zehu, which is really what this whole year is about. 2 years are about. What our life is about. Jews were created to think. Much more than just that. We'll see soon. If for a Jew, I think, therefore I am, this world will be a very depressing place. We're much more than just thought. But you can't get anywhere without thought. HaTorah, once it's given, claims to be the blueprint of the world, of the creation of the world, and therefore defines retroactively. Moshe Rabbeinu writes, Bereshit bara Elokim et hashamayim v'et haaretz, Lech Lecha, all that happened in Sefer Bereshit. Hashem put his stamp on that. This is my words. I gave it. And as such, once you accept Anochi Hashem Elokecha, retroactively, you're mechuyav to the first word in the Torah, and that is the Bereshit. But not only to the beginning. The day of Matan Torah applies to the very end of the Torah. What do we find at the very end of the Torah? We don't have the time to see the source inside. Just peek at it. You can look at it afterwards inside if you wish. Source number 7 from Parshat Vayelech, at the end of the Torah, where the Torah wraps itself up in the end of Sefer Devarim, Moshe is asked on his very last day to come with Yeshua to the tent of meeting. This is your last day, Moshe. You need to know, and Yeshua hears the words as well. You need to know that you're going to die today. Your children are going to go into Eretz Yisrael. And they're going to go off the derech. Not may go off the derech and what may happen as a result, as we find in Vayayim Shema or in other places. This is what will happen. Anybody who has issues with free will, go, we can discuss it in a one-on-one. The Rambam discusses that. So putting that aside for a moment, a philosophical question. Not what may happen. For the first time the Torah talks about and tells us what will happen all the way till the end of days. That which in this week's Parsha Vayechi, Yaakov Avinu tried to give over to his children, and it was taken away from him. Now it's not taken away. Moshe gives over the Song of Ha'azinu, which is basically recording the story of the Jewish people throughout the ages. How are they going to go into Eretz Yisrael? At some point they're going to start worshiping idols, going off the derech of Hashem, going through persecutions, exile, thousands of years of galut, and at the end of days they'll come back to Eretz Yisrael, and Hashem will take revenge from the Goyim. In one sentence, that is what Parshat Ha'azinu is about. So much so, the Ramban in Parshat Ha'azinu, I always quote that Ramban, says that everything in the Song of Ha'azinu happened and unfolded according to plan, at least up to my days, says the Ramban, exactly according to the plan of the Song of Ha'azinu. And therefore he says that the Song of Ha'azinu is a testimony that obligates us. And we have an obligation on God's part for the future Geula to come. Because just like the song unfolded up to my stage according to plan, the rest, till the Yemot HaMashiach, is going to happen according to plan as well. Which means, if in Sefer Bereshit, Torah becomes the blueprint of creation, Sefer Devarim, the Torah becomes the blueprint for history. Let's move on. Next Yesod. We're already in Yesod 5. You quickly look in source number 8. So this quickly, we're starting to run out of time. In the middle of source number 8, from Parashat Vayetchanan, you find the following psukim. Right in the middle, you have, I underline, Kish'al na leyamim rishonim. Please look inside. Kish'al na leyamim rishonim. The Torah here is readdressing Matan Torah, and here it's going into much more to it. In any case, the Torah here goes and says, Kish'al na leyamim rishonim. Hashem says, through the words of Moshe, please, Jews, go, ask. Check historically, check the history books, research, ask other nations. Asher hayu lefanecha, lemin hayom asher bara Elohim adam al haaretz, ulemiktzei hashamayim v'ktzei hashamayim. Check anywhere in the world, ever in the past or anywhere on the globe. Haniyak hadavar gadol hazeh o nishma kamo. Was there ever such an event in history? Ever? Anywhere? Hashama am kol Elohim midaber mitoch haesh kasher shamata vayechi. Was there ever an event that an entire people stood and heard the word of Hashem coming down straight to their ears from heaven? Anywhere in the world, go check. Check. Is there any nation, any religion that claims so? Or, I'm continuing, look inside. Go on Yisai Elohim. לבוא לקחת לו גוי מקרב גוי, במוסות, באותות ובמופתים, ובמלחמה, וביד חזקה, ובזרוע נטויה, ובמוראים גדולים ככל אשר עשה לכם אשר לקחם במצרים לעיניך. Have you ever seen anybody, any nation that testifies to the fact that they experience as a people, as a whole, God speaking from heaven, or that God came to take a nation from the midst of another nation through miracles? And if you discover, if you research that, you may discover as a result that no, it never ever happened in the past in history, and you may start realizing that it will never happen again in history. And that may lead you to the following conclusion, a pasuk that we all know. I'm reading inside, underlined it. Ata horet al hadat, Yitziat Mitzrayim together with Matan Torah, which by the way are infused together in Anochi Hashem Elokecha. I'm speaking to you now. Yet Asher hotzeiticha me'eretz Mitzrayim mibeit avadim, Hashem is binding together Matan Torah with Yitziat Mitzrayim. The infusing of both is supposed to produce in you Jews the following awareness. I'm reading inside, Ata horet al hadat, Ki Hashem hu Elokim, ein od milvado. That's what it's supposed to lead you to. And yet, you may ask, but throughout the ages, 40 days later, Klal Yisrael sinned at Chet HaEgel. For generations, the Jewish people worshipped idols in Eretz Yisrael. Something doesn't seem to 100% work. What's the issue? What's the problem? When you check the historical process, we start as a people where at a certain peak of revelation, the 10 plagues, Kriyat Yam Suf, miracles in the desert, Matan Torah, Hashem keeps revealing Himself miraculously on the expense of the laws of nature. We move into Eretz Yisrael, there's still miracles in Beit HaMikdash, every now and then by Nevi'im, but we've shifted completely into a new stage. We all know this. Into a world of Eretz Yisrael that doesn't work like in the desert, it works based on the laws of nature. Next stage, we go out to exile, Galut, Hester Panim, no miracles. But something happens. A strange miracle that doesn't mention God's name at all. And you can easily not see anything has happened. The end of Megillat Esther. Achashverosh is still busy trying to control the world by imposing new tax. Who cares about tax? Any future accountants here, you'll forgive me, but who cares about taxes at the end of the fascinating, absolutely fascinating story of Megillat Esther? But from his, why does the Torah have to why does Megillat Esther have to finish off on such an anticlimactic note? Taxes? Who cares about taxes? For the Jewish people, the world turned upside down. Nafachu. Right? Next Chag coming up. But from Achashverosh's perspective, nothing's changed. No, God doesn't appear. There's no mentioning of God in the Megillah. New world, setting the stage for thousands of years of Esther Panim and Galut. God doesn't reveal Himself in miracles. What do we see from this? That the chart of God's revelation decreases stage after stage after stage as the generations go by. Why is it as such? Superficially, a person will say, well, we're behaving worse and worse, and Hashem is more and more hiding His face. May be true on some superficial level. The depth of it is as such. Says the Rambam, I didn't photocopy it, I apologize. Hilchot Yesodei Torah, listen carefully. Perk up those of you who need to, please. Says the Rambam, in the context of Hilchot Yesodei Torah and Sefer Mishneh Torah, that anybody whose belief in God is based on miracles, Ki ha'ma'amin al pi ha'otot yesh b'libo dofi. He who believes in God based on miracles, something's off in his heart. What do you mean? We just said everything is based on Yetziat Mitzrayim, Kriyat Yam Suf, Matan Torah. True. But history is forcing you to take things forward. I'm going to work with you in a way that I'm going to go more and more to the hiding, God says. Why? What's the point? Guys, what's the point? Why would God go more and more to the hiding? Constructively, not as a, don't think in terms of punishments.
To chase after Him.
God is playing hard to get. As simple as such, very good. The more God hides, the more you have to actively take the role of searching for Him. We spoke about it in the beginning. That was Yesod number 2. You need to acquire it. Hashem did not make any revealed miracles for Avraham Avinu. He found them with His, as we said, bare fingers. I need to discover Hashem on our own, to acquire our Emunah. As long as miracles are in the world, we're spoon-fed God. That's not a relationship with a Kadosh Baruch Hu. That launches it off. That shows us that the world of nature is only one layer and one slice in a much greater reality, which goes way beyond and supersedes nature. We'll develop that in a moment. Think outside of the box of nature. That means when you do that, you're a Jew. Don't limit yourself to the world that God created. Think outside of the box. That's where I am, says God. Hamakom. I've said it already before. The discovery of Avraham Avinu. Hashem is beyond the world. How does that relate to us? I'll tell you how it relates to us. One of the biggest mistakes, as common as can be, I think many Rabbanim fail with that as well. I completely disagree with that approach. One term, which just shows how brainwashed and how submissive we are to a world which its accomplishments are tremendous, but that we bow down to it, and that's the scientific world. We owe so much of our health, of modern technology, of our comfort to science and technology, granted 100%. Do we use it or do we bow down to it? I'm talking about referring to Torah, mitzvot, Hashem, with the usage of the term proves. That's an illegitimate term to use. And very often people use it, and even Rabbanim use it. And it's the biggest obstacle to proper Emunah. A guy called me, one of our alumni, a few weeks ago. He said he went out with a girl. I said, very nice. What did you do? Went out for coffee. So what's the issue? I don't have a proof that she actually exists. I said, what? So I said, take your phone number. She said, well, that's somebody who will be able to philosophically prove it? He says, no, it's a number of a psychologist. Very fine psychologist. Now, I don't think anybody in this room believes that story. You're right, I'm making it up just for the purpose of what I'm about to say right now. What am I about to say? I'm about to say, why is it that nobody believes me? Because that's absolutely ridiculous. We don't need a proof for the fact that the pleasant Jewish maiden is sitting on the other side of the coffee table. She's just there. Let's say a philosopher comes to you. I've had such conversations with people. Recently, a young man, not from Yeshiva, came to discuss issues of Emunah with me. And then this is the level that he spoke. He said, how can I believe that I exist if I don't have any proof for that? I said, what are you talking about? The person is totally wrapped up in scientific concepts. It's not that I need a proof for the fact that I exist. If a philosopher would come and challenge you with that, I said, take a hike. Jump into the lake. Go see somebody. Not just that I don't need a proof for the fact that I exist. The term proof is totally irrelevant. It's not shayach b'chlal. What do we see from that? That our deepest convictions, what I know more than anything else that I know in the world is, first of all, that I exist. It's not at all based on proofs. My understanding of Emunah, that extent of clarity that I have about my own existence, that extent of clarity I have about his, capital H, existence. Yes, it takes time and effort to get to that clarity. This is what this day is about, to try starting such processes. Anybody is welcome on a one-on-one to come to me, as Rav Koren said, many wonderful people on the staff, to discuss these things with people outside of yeshiva. But I at least will present it as such. It's the biggest obstacle to proper Emunah, is the usage of that term. I took a couple weeks ago, some of our older guys, to a beautiful performance of Nigunim Chasidim in the Emunah. They had a great time. Amazing. They also had an amazing time. The performance, the company. If I were to go and tell Nanu, prove to me that was a great experience. What are you talking about, Amos? Are you okay? A guy will call and tell me, I went out with a girl for 3 months. We decided to get engaged. Prove to me that she's your future wife. What are you talking about? The deepest convictions and choices we make in life have nothing to do with proofs. But what goes on, we're so used to bowing down to scientific definition for reality that only if something can scientifically be proven does it exist, and if not, not. We're wired to think that way. And therefore, we project that onto HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and if he fits into my pre-existing, wired by society's definition, he exists, and if not, not. Or at least, will be one of the main causes for God then to be vague. So then what do I use if I don't use proofs? I'll tell you what you use. Go out to the countryside now in Eretz Yisrael. Everything is green. Flowers are starting to come out now, like every year after Hanukkah. We need a lot more rain, but there was enough rain to produce flowers. You walk around the countryside and you see flowers. When I see flowers in the countryside, especially in Eretz Yisrael, I say, wow, he who made this world has beautiful taste. He's an artist who has beautiful taste. Did I prove anything? Absolutely not. But the flower, which is beautiful, which I kneel down to look at and stare at, indicated to me that it came from somewhere, from a source that has good taste. Or, if I'm not in that place, I can say, did randomness produce this beautiful flower? Or a conscious source who cared to give over the world in beautiful colors created this flower? It's a choice you have to make. Which makes more sense to you? You have to be actively involved. Bezrat Hashem, your wife will be beautiful in your eyes. Did randomness produce it? Or a conscious being who cared enough to give her over to you in a way that she's pleasant in your eyes? There's a lot more for marriage than that. But there's significance to that. Does it come from nothing? Or does it come from a conscious source? Everybody in this room, including two people, but we'll mention their names, have faces that look different from each other. Nobody in this world looks exactly alike. What would Charles Darwin say about it? I don't know. What's the name of the guy today? Richard Dawkins? What will he say about it? Don't know. What does Torah say about it? That your face reflects your inside. Hapanim testify to the pnim. Your neshama spills out through your face. Richard Dawkins with it. That's nonsense. What is neshama? I'll tell him, you know what? Forget the neshama. Mind. You heard the term mind, Mr. Dawkins? Yes, I heard the term mind. Your mind is reflected on your face. What are you talking about? That's not scientific. I'll tell him, I don't care. He'll claim the mind is not reality. Science doesn't know what the mind is. I'll say, Yafeh. How many people here do shuk schlepping on Thursday afternoon or have done? Yafeh. The more the better. I suspect that 80%, 90%, maybe 100% of the cases, you helped an old lady or an old man take their bags to the train, and they looked at you, and in a very honest way they said, thank you. On Fridays, I usually take our cute little son, Benayachai, 2.5 years old, to a little mini zoo in the city of Katrin, the town of Katrin, next to where we live in the Luban. And he usually goes and he feeds the goats. It's like a little feeding farm. And I asked him the other week, did the goat say thank you? So Benayachai says, nah. He's 2.5 years old. He understands thank you is something that a goat is mufkam imenu. It's not shayach to him. He started laughing. What do you mean a goat saying thank you? He's 2.5 years old. He understands that thank you is a term that belongs to the human being. But what part of the human being? To the part that we have and that a goat does not have. I have hands, legs. Goats have eyes. Yes. I have a mind that a goat does not have. And that mind says thank you. What is the scientific definition for thank you? What are you talking about? I'll sit with an alumnus and he'll say, how's your shalom bayit? Wonderful. You love your wife? What's your scientific definition for love? What are you talking about? The most meaningful aspects of human life are nothing to do with science. Science cannot enter into that place. And I can go on and on. What are the chances that if you take a hippopotamus, put him in a light train, that it will get up in front of an old man that goes into the train? It will have a hard time getting up because it's quite fat. But I think it's more than that. What are the chances that you put an ape in a psychiatric ward and it will see its fellow ape from the biblical zoo as a patient there that will run over and say, "Oh, don't tell anybody that I'm here," because it doesn't want to hurt its feelings? We laugh. Why? Because these are all aspects of the human mind. And science has nothing to say about it, because the mind, not the brain, the mind is made up of quote-unquote material that has nothing to do with science. I'll go as far as to say that as I see it, if I'm not interested at all in reading any of his material, Richard Dawkins is an insult to the human mind. Not to the human body, to the human mind. You want to tell me that Roy Klein comes from an ape? You want to tell me that the Rabbanit, Mrs. Frankel, is going to be meeting with you this evening? Who were the other mothers, the other parents of 3 boys who were killed by Yimach Shma v'Zichram, Bnei Ishmael, and dealt with the whole situation with charm, with nobility, that people all over the world were so moved by? That she comes from an ape? That is such a havamina. I was at the funeral in Modi'in. Netanyahu spoke. People like criticizing him. I'll give him a credit for a moment. He said a beautiful sentence. He said it sounded as genuine as can be. Didn't sound political at all. Thank you, these 3 sets of parents, for reminding us who we actually are as Jews. What did he mean? Thank you for reminding us that we come from the apes. Thank you for reminding us that we do not come from the apes. If anybody does come from the apes, are those mechablim that killed those boys. And the truth is, I should go to the biblical zoo and ask Mechila from the apes for making such a connection. The Gemara in Masechet Brachot, I have to start wrapping up. The Gemara in Masechet Brachot, we're not going to read it inside. People from Shana Bet and Hidmanut here know we've dealt with this Gemara a lot. Source number 9, just peek in it. You can look at it afterwards when you get a chance. It wraps it all up so beautifully. That the neshama, you want to use the term mind? Use the term mind. The mind, or the neshama, testifies to the source that it comes from. It testifies to the nature, or quote unquote to the material that it's a piece of, and that is the source of the neshama, that is Kadosh Baruch Hu himself. Hashem is nothing but the mind of the world. In the same way that my body has a mind on the inside of it, which is really the essence of who I am, and my body is only the outer shell, the world of Olam Hazeh is an outer shell. The essence of this world is a Kadosh Baruch Hu. It's a Gemara that's worthwhile going through it. Makes 5 comparisons, 5 relationships between HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the world and the Neshama in the world. To wrap up, say the following. We don't have any source in the Torah. I don't know such sources in Torah Shebechtav, in Chazal, that talk about proofs for God. What we do have are testimonies. Edut, Luchot HaEdut. Luchot HaEdut are an Edut for Matan Torah. Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. You noticed, as it's written in the Torah, and I asked my wife also to enlarge them, the Ayin and the Dalet in source number 1 are large. And Jews declare a testimony about God's oneness in the world. And when they declare it, they serve as a testimony for God's oneness in the world. More so, not just that their declaration of the Jews is a testimony for God, Jewish existence throughout the ages, despite all attempts to demolish us, is constant, daily testimony for God. Atem eidai ne'um Hashem, it says in Sefer Yeshayahu. You are my witnesses. You testify to me in Olam Hazeh. I do not appear in Olam Hazeh. I'm not made up of Olam Hazeh material, but I do appear through garments. And you are my garments in this world. You are the testimony on earth, on planet earth, for my truth in the world. Atem eidai ne'um Hashem. The world is full of testimonies. No proofs. We're not dealing with science. Hashem claims, I've left a lot of indications, testimonies that testify to what this world is about and what I am actually about. The Gemara Masechet Eruvin says, if Torah wasn't given, we would have learned modesty from a cat. What does that mean? The Maharal explains, the way that the cat behaves testifies to the he who planned out the architect of the cat. If the cat behaves in a way of modesty, not necessarily conscious of what it's doing, as we all assume, but that itself testifies to the architect who made the cat. And as such, that's one little example. The world keeps testifying to God, to who He's about, to His flavor, to His taste, to what He cares about. That's what Avraham Avinu picked up on. He heard the testimony. It's not going to be proofs. It's never going to be based on proofs, because if that would be the case, it would ruin the whole story. The whole point is, I'm leaving in front of you, listen carefully, this is the most important thought. We'll finish with that. I'm leaving in front of you a world which is not so clear-cut. Like certain psychology tests, a picture. You can read different things into it. Tell me how you interpret it, I'll tell you who you are. Just like in these psychology tests. The world is planned out to be not 100% clear-cut. You can read many things into it. But it's your choice to choose how to look at it. I, God says, left enough indications for you that if you look at it carefully, with a very clean, innocent and honest heart, you will discover me. But you need to actively search. You need to listen to the testimonies. אתה הורית לדעת כי השם הוא האלוקים אין עוד מלבדו. Everybody in the world today, scientists, cosmologists, Torah sources, Rishonim, Mekubalim, all agree today. The world came from one singular point. That's a common term to be found in Kabbalah and Rishonim. It's a term to be found in science today. One point, and from that one point, all space, all time, all dimensions come out of it. From one point. And what that implies is as follows. And nothing less than the following. Everything goes by the opening point. If you hold, like that goy that I mentioned earlier, that opening point comes from nothing, that means the entire world is one big nothing. But if everything comes from one point, which is a conscious will of God, then everything, but everything in the world, everything, is infused with God's will in a way that you can't escape it one bit. It's a question of, this is a question of black and white. As you grow older, you realize that in life things, as your hair turns grayer, many things start looking more and more gray. Not this. This is an issue of black and white. It cannot be both. Either the world comes from a singular point of consciousness and will, love, care, olam chesed yibaneh, which means the entire world is meant to be, is about love, olam chesed yibaneh, that's what it was made for, that's why life comes from love, or the whole world comes from meaningless randomness. Nothing. If I were to meet Richard Dawkins, I would say Shalom Aleichem, I would say hello, you are nothing. I'd say, what? I spent my whole life getting PhDs to prove that this world is nothing. Exactly, then you are nothing. He's a walking contradiction, you understand? He clearly has a lot of self-pride, and he views himself very important based on his conclusions. But his conclusions are completely 100% meaningless, because the whole world that he lives in swims in one big soup of meaninglessness, because it all comes from one meaningless point. It's either or. And the implication is scary. I know for myself. Because if I choose, I have to make the choice. The ending of Torah, Parshat Nitzavim. Life and death in front of you. I beg you, choose life. You need to make the choice. ראה נתתי לפניך היום את החיים ואת הטוב ואת המוות ואת הרע ובחרת בחיים. We often look at it to choose whether to do good deeds or bad deeds. It doesn't begin in deeds. It begins in thoughts. That's the beginning of man. And thoughts begin in one's worldview. How you look at the world, what map of reality that you have, that from that will trickle down how you behave. If you live in a consciousness of Olam Chesed Yibaneh, your whole life you'll try to do Chesed. If you live in a worldview that the world is all random and meaningless, you'll just try to have as much of a fun time as you can throughout your life. You have to make the choice. I have to make the choice. The whole point is that we make the choice. Emunah is a question of Bechira. Which worldview one wants to take? And it's a question between you and God alone. The last 2-3 sentences. We'll finish with that. The problem with hearing these words, problem for me also. If indeed the singular point is Ein Od Milvado, it scares us. Why? Because then we think that takes over the whole world, the whole universe. Every iota of space and time, my entire life. That cancels my life. I can't enjoy life. I'm so used to enjoying life. Sheker. Sheker, and again sheker. Thank God we're not Christians. We're Jewish. We're made to enjoy the world. But I beg you, God says, enjoy it the way I define pleasure. Torah, Ein Od Milvado, Emunah, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. When a person lives in that world, it doesn't come at the expense of the pleasures of life. It enhances the pleasures of life. It takes the pleasures of life to a totally different place. Everybody's old enough and experienced enough in life to know the following. Hashem will forgive me to saying such a sentence, but I think I have to say it. Who would you enjoy more? To spend the night with a young lady that you're not married to? Or to help an old lady cross the street to Rehov Yafa? Deep down, you all know the true answer. I know the true answer. The next morning, that young lady's no longer there, you remain empty and depressed. It's always the case. It's a universal rule. Always you remain empty and depressed afterwards. The old lady, you helped her, and wakes up with you the next morning. She's still there. She's there with you 10 years later. 60 years later, you may say, reflect upon the fact that you helped an old lady, and from the most genuine place, she cried and she said, thank you. Her mind said thank you to you. It was an eternal experience. How can you even compare the two? That's what Torah is. Jewish Torah. We're not talking Christianity. Thank God. Shelo Sani Goy. We're Jews. I made you to enjoy my world, but let me define for you the pleasures. They're so much more sweet. Your Shabbat table. You and your wife, B'ezrat Hashem, within a couple, 2, 3, 4 years, people are going to be getting married here. What Shabbos table are you going to want to have? Where people sit and talk about what's the latest BMW in the market? Gossiping as to who built the biggest house recently in the 5 towns. Discussing for 5 hours how exactly was this dish made and that dish made. That's one possibility. Or you and your wife invited a couple that doesn't know so much about their Judaism, and you saw the way your kids behave was so polite and so pleasant. Hopefully if you educate them correctly. Not easy job at all. Especially not in our generation. And the conversation were divrei Torah, thought-provoking ideas, beautiful compliments to you, to everybody in the room, as how they behave during the week, to your wife and the beautiful food. At the end of the evening, the couple is about to say goodbye. They come to you and your wife, and they say, we've never had such an experience. You opened up our eyes to realize how beautiful Judaism is. How beautiful is the Shabbat table for Jews. Yes, the good food is part of it, but that doesn't end there, it only begins there. And we never knew how profound the Parshat HaShavua actually is. You changed our life, thank you. The couple leads, you look into your wife's eyes, and she looks in your eyes saying, wow, it was worth the effort. One of the speakers today, one of the best speakers today, I love his speech, and I often bring my wife to hear him. There's one point in his speech, maybe he'll give a different speech today. For years he was giving the same speech, and there was always a point that irked me, which I totally disagree with that approach, inherently and educationally. We'll really finish with that. And that is, the main point of the speech was, ultimately, the main place of pleasure is Olam Haba, and therefore it's worth keeping Torah and Mitzvot for the ultimate pleasure, which is in Olam Haba. And he quoted the beginning of Misnad Yesharim always for that. I disagree with that approach. The husband and wife that look into each other's eyes and get the pleasure, the nachat, for giving Hashem nachat, they don't have to wait for Olam Haba. They experience Olam Haba already in Olam Hazeh. That's proper Torah education. Torah life is worth living because it makes life in Olam Hazeh gorgeous, meaningful, beautiful, and a path to happiness. And nothing less dramatic than that. You don't have to wait for Olam Haba. It's experienced in Olam Hazeh. That is really the secret of Torah. And that's the very bottom line of all that Emunah is about, and what Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad is about. I hope this day is productive for all. Thank you.